Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Jessie and the toys will be taking on technology in the 5th installment of Pixar's signature Toy Story franchise. 8-year-old Bonnie, voiced by Scarlett Spears, is still enjoying playing with her toys, with Joan Cusack's Jessie happily fulfilling her new role as sheriff, but Bonnie is struggling to make friends who are more interested in technology. So Bonnie's parents get her a LilyPad tablet, voiced by Greta Lee, which quickly eats up Bonnie's attention, causing friction between Lily and the toys. When Jessie and Bullseye end up getting lost trying to stop Bonnie from using her LilyPad, Buzz Lightyear, voiced by Tim Allen, teams up with Woody, voiced by Tom Hanks, who now helps abandon toys to get Jessie back home. I, like a lot of people my age, have a huge attachment to Toy Story. The first film opened in the UK when I was 5 in early 1986, and is probably one of the earliest movies I can recall seeing in a cinema, and I watched the VHS many times. But unlike a lot of kids my age, I was more into Woody than I was Buzz, so I actually got that for my Christmas present that year, as opposed to a lot of kids who infamously didn't get a Buzz Lightyear. But it was also the film that not just set Pixar on the map, but changed animation as a medium forever. Like it or not, it ushered in 3D computer animation as the predominant medium, with traditional 2D animation largely disappearing from cinema screens within the decade. And Toy Story 2 is considered to be a superior sequel, introducing more characters and storytelling complexity, although if I'm being honest, I'm one of those people who actually prefers the first film, as I know I didn't watch the second one as much, and I'm aware that my opinion is not unbiased and there's a lot of nostalgia influencing it. But the key thing is that the Toy Story franchise is something that has matured with its viewers. So in the third film, where Andy is grown up and going to college, I was exactly around that age and going to university myself, so those final scenes where Andy bids farewell absolutely destroyed me at the time. As a trilogy, the first 3 Toy Story movies are one of the strongest around, and there's not a bad one in the set. They're all great movies for kids and adults, with great jokes and strong emotional centres. They could have easily ended after 3, but Toy Story continued after that with a series of television specials that eventually culminated in the 4th film in 2019. And I don't think it's a controversial opinion to say that Toy Story 4 is the weakest one, which is not to say there isn't good things about it. I really liked it was centred around Annie Potts' Bo Peep, who sat out the third film completely. You had Keanu Reeves as the evil Knievel-esque Duke Kaboom, and it culminated in an emotional send-off for Tom Hanks' Woody, or so we thought at the time. But it just wasn't quite on the same level as its predecessors, and I've not revisited it since I saw it when it opened in cinemas. There was a lot of focus on Tony Hale's Forky, which they really wanted to make a new breakout character, but I think most older viewers found him a bit annoying, not to mention bringing up some weird existential questions as trash being repurposed as a toy. Most of all though, it just felt like an addendum. 3 had a sense of closure, and here we go with another film with another potential ending. Although, now that I think about it, it could also be that my response to the 4th film was simply that it wasn't the story that I grew up with. The films had shifted onto Bonnie, and obviously I didn't identify with her as much as I did Andy, because these movies are, to some extent, meant for a new generation, namely the kids introduced to it by their parents who watched it when they were their age. And these films are all about the inevitability of change and time passing, and having to learn to accept that. So of course the films themselves have too, and I have too. They prepared me for that. Because Toy Story is the series that made Pixar's name, not to mention critically and particularly commercially consistent, the studio keeps revisiting it, especially if they've had a shaky period. So 4 followed a series of disappointments like The Good Dinosaur or Cars 3, and this 5th film is obviously a response to a similar rough patch like Elio or the spin-off Lightyear, the Toy Story film that everyone wants to forget, including probably Pixar themselves. Toy Story 5 also notably features Andrew Stanton as director for the first time in the series. He's helmed several movies for Pixar, including WALL-E and has written all of the movies to date, co-writing this one with co-director Kenna Harris, making their feature debut. They previously wrote and directed the Lucas short Ciao Alberto. But 30 years later, it's remarkable to say that Toy Story is still dazzling the imagination, even if the fifth entry isn't the very best one, although I can say right out of the gate that it is better than the fourth. Although that's not to say that it doesn't get off to a bit of a rocky start. The big pitch for Toy Story 5, even if it is slightly misleading, and we'll get to that, is that it's toys versus tech. And if that sounds like it might be potentially a bit heavy-handed, it can. In the opening scenes, Bonnie may be playing with her toys, but a lot of her peers are not. She's trying to shyly introduce herself to the kids across the street, but they're much more interested in their own lily pads. When Jessie goes over to investigate, it's staged as a send-up of a horror movie, with the other toys left to rot out in the garden, warning of the coming storm of tech. And to demonstrate their point, they bring Jessie up to the roof, and in every house, as far as the eye can see, there are people locked onto their glowing devices in darkened rooms, with Bonnie being the sole exception. It's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now, don't get me wrong, I have some pretty strong opinions on technology, and especially AI, which is the one area the film deliberately sidesteps and admittedly feels a bit behind the curve on. But that visual made me concerned that the story was going to be a blanket technology is evil theme, because that would be rather blunt to say the least. Tech can do great things, but it's something that has to be used properly. And Toy Story does exist now in a bit of a weird space where it is a children's film, but it also knows that a substantial portion of its audience are adults, and that kind of fear-mongering is almost certainly playing towards them over their kids. It's a timely topic. A big concern with parents these days is that they're worried their kids are too invested in their tablets and phones, and maybe even a guilt that they've used it as a babysitter because they're too busy or need something to distract them. And then you've got all these debates about age restrictions going on the internet in places like the UK and Australia. The thing is though, I may not have kids of my own, and it's been a long while since I was one, but I am an uncle, and I just don't quite think this is how kids grow up these days. Bonnie is effectively ostracised by her peers because she still uses toys, but these kids are like 8 or so. They're probably still using toys and tech, and I did feel this would be a plot point that would be more applicable to slightly older kids, like tweens or so. I do wonder if the kids this movie is made for wouldn't actually recognise their own experience in it, maybe. With that being said, it does touch upon some ideas about kids feeling the pressure to grow up too fast, and that technology, especially social media, is something that is quite complex and potentially damaging. That is essentially at the heart of Bonnie's storyline, that Lily is trying to recommend her friends like an algorithm, but it doesn't truly understand her or the friends it's linked her with. That is what Jessie and the toys are trying to fight against. They know her, they know how she plays, and it's not a substitute for real face-to-face connection and interaction. It does harken back to themes that Pixar has explored recently in another sequel, Inside Out 2, and the peer pressure that kids often feel, but with a much stronger emphasis on bullying. That part is heartbreakingly real, especially because the shaming can be hidden away, and parents don't always know how to control it. Bonnie's parents, especially her dad, are frankly a bit clueless. But it would also be wildly hypocritical for a studio like Pixar that has always been at the cutting edge to make technology the villain, and over time Toy Story 5 does start to find itself adding more nuance into the plot. You can almost feel the iterations of the story, like it was originally much more anti-tech, and then that kind of softened in rewrites, and that kind of bumpiness in the first act especially means it doesn't have the same storytelling elegance of the earlier films. You can even see it in Lily Pad's characterization a bit, where she's very much the antagonist and is quite bossy and domineering, using her sophistication to outwit the toys and usurp them, fully intent on replacing them. But Lily isn't Lotso or Stinky Pete, and she is doing what she does because she thinks it's the right thing for Bonnie. And so there's a later shift in her characterization that aligns with the message of the film, but does feel perhaps slightly abrupt. There's a lot of story beats here that are familiar from previous Toy Story films, from a new plaything taking over the room to toys getting separated and lost, but there is one major thing that is very different, and that is that this is very much a girl story, which hasn't been done before. Bonnie may have owned the toys in the previous outing, but it was still very much about Woody, even if Bo Peep had a major part in it as well. But they've chosen to focus on Jessie and have her storyline run in parallel with Bonnie, and they're the driving force of the film. With Jessie now being in charge, she's taken to the role of Sheriff Well, and it gives the character her chance in the spotlight that she's been crying out for since she was introduced in the first sequel. Her key flashback there was genuinely emotional, and the movie makes clear right from the very start that it's going to be revisiting that territory by replaying those scenes, which actually reminds you how much Pixar's animation has improved since then. But that is potentially dicey territory. You could easily ruin the impact of that with a retcon, so you don't want to muck that up. Happily, I'm pleased to report that not only does it not, but it even enriches it. Jessie is the audience's point of view for much of the film, and her arc represents its changing attitude towards technology. She and Bullseye find themselves confronting the past and how things have changed when they find themselves at the home of horse girl Blaze, voiced by Michelle Harris. That's where she encounters Smarty Pants, a toilet training device voiced by Conan O'Brien in absolutely scene-stealing form with some cheeky potty humour quips. Smarty, abandoned for years and low on batteries, initially starts off as quite annoying, but he starts to become useful, and Jessie starts to relate to him as someone who was left behind herself. Finding your purpose is a major core theme, from the other seemingly obsolete tech left behind in a drawer like Craig Robinson's Atlas and Shelby Rabara's Snappy, to Jessie herself. It's about being adaptable, and that no one is useless or irrelevant. And while tech does cause a lot of problems in the film, it also plays a very large role in solving them as well, even if it does stretch credibility somewhat. Would a toilet train device really have hub connectivity? I know we have a lot of unnecessary internet-connected devices these days, but what is it doing? Is it rating the turds on social media? And Joan Cusack finally ascends to the lead role. She's been a memorable character actor for decades, and often hilarious and eccentric, and here she jumps at both the comic and emotional sides as Jessie jumps into the spotlight. Obviously, Cusack's voice has noticeably aged, having played the role for 25 years, but so have many of the surviving voice cast, and I actually think it adds to the sense of melancholy to Jessie, because obviously she's a toy that's been around for a while. Lily is astonished to find out that she's old, so her voice does fit the story and the character at this point. It's a great performance, and honestly, I've missed her presence on screen, as this is her first acting role in 7 years, having stepped away to spend more time with her family, so frankly, it's a treat to have her return at all. But for a movie about purpose, I feel like they never quite found one for Woody. The previous film had effectively written him off into the sunset, and it may have felt wrong to make a Toy Story movie without Woody, but that's probably what they should have done. And I say this as someone who likes the character and Tom Hanks, who still gets top billing here, but that's what you set up at the end of the previous film, and it would have been braver to keep it that way. That's not to say that you couldn't bring him back, but you really need a good justification for undoing the exit, and they don't come up with one. Woody gets called in to help, mostly out of crossed wires, and steps in Jessie's absence, butting heads with Buzz, who she deputised before going on her trip. And it is fun to see the original duo back together and squabbling, harkening back to their old dynamic, but Woody contributes very little to this story if you actually took him out of it. The most he adds is a lot of jokes, again, about how old he is, from a bald spot on the back of his head to a middle-aged poncho that he tries to hide under his poncho. Clearly there's a lot of stuffing jiggling around in there now that he doesn't have a voice box inside of him. But Woody's not the only one suffering from some bloat, as the franchise is in general at this point. There's a huge cast now, with loads and loads of returning characters, and you can clearly see they're straining on how to actually use them. A lot of the legacy cast members like Rex, Potato Head, or Slinky spend most of the film stuck in a box in a garage. You can't help but think that they could have found someone else to team up with Buzz instead of Woody. On top of that, you've also got Annie Potts back as Bo Peep and Keanu Reeves as Duke Kaboom in what are glorified cameos bookending the film with Woody, and a whole set of new characters introduced in this entry. It's all just getting unwieldy, and you can't keep bringing everyone back for every movie as much as they're fan favourites. But Buzz probably gets his best use in this movie in a long while, especially because he was particularly sidelined in the fourth. That makes sense given that he and Jessie have a long-standing relationship which finally gets paid off as he leads the charge to rescue her. Tim Allen is also on his best form in a while, and he's quite funny in this one, I thought. That's especially because of a bizarre running subplot involving a group of tech-enabled Buzz Lightyear toys from a cargo container that has washed up on a beach, clearly inspired by real news stories of novelty Garfield phones and Lego doing the same. And because these Buzzes, Buzz-Eye, because they're fresh out of the box, they're all like how he was in the first movie, thinking they're actual space rangers looking for Star Command, and tying into the themes of purpose, they discover their real mission along the way. So periodically the film just cuts to the band of Buzzes roaming the woods together, which borders on the surreal. It's a really odd subplot, and obviously it does eventually converge with the main plot, but for a while it almost feels like you could scoop out these scenes into their own very weird short film. Is this Pixar's attempts to emulate the Minions? Probably, but I did find it amusing in just how offbeat it is. So yeah, I enjoyed Toy Story 5. I don't think it's the very best of the series, and it has the usual problems with long-running franchises where it is repeating ideas and has too many characters gumming up the works. But it is just as adaptable as the characters themselves, managing to spark the imagination and say something about kids and their relationship to toys, and adults to their own childhood. As I said before, it is a superior movie to the fourth, although again it does have the slight feeling of something continuing beyond a natural endpoint that stops it from matching the original trilogy. But it still has a lot of the joy that overcomes a slightly wobbly script that does improve as it goes along. And as usual, it absolutely got me in the feels. Once we get to a certain scene, oh yeah, there were tears. These movies remain emotional powerhouses, and even more so as they mature. But most of all, it's a franchise that finds a way of making me feel like a kid again. And I think it does for a lot of people. That's why it's so successful. And that's likely why they'll keep making them to infinity and beyond. If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip on my Ko-fi page, or with YouTube's Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video. Or you'll be my favourite deputy if you join my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also join YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can just simply like, share and hype the video. It really does help more than you know. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.